decided today that we're going to be the Greek fates. So I am Clotho, who is the fate who spins the thread of life, and Stacy is Lachesis, who measures, and Kristen is Atropos, who cuts the string at the end of life. And we've kind of interpreted these different fates as embodying different kinds of technologies. And so what we'll do is give very brief talks about each of our characters and answer some questions, and then hopefully give you some time to come up and play with the loom and the wheel and feel the fiber and listen to the beautiful sounds that the 3D printer makes and all that good stuff. So what I'll do to start with is just to tell you the kind of the coding technological thing that we'll be using today. This is a light blue bean, which is a Bluetooth low energy little tiny board. It's got an accelerometer on board, and so we have one each for each of our technologies. It measures, let's see, let's do this. It basically measures movement and force of movement. And so right now what you're seeing, the numbers on the screen are X, Y, and Z axes on this particular board.
That would be
How's that?
Ah.
Thank you. All right, so one of the first things we experimented with was taking How's that? Okay. So we took the numbers that were being created and we mapped them onto groups of words. And so for the x-axis I have upwards, and the y-axis I have forward and backwards. And then for the z-axis I have a group of animal words and a group of the fates words, and I'll tell you more about the animals a little later. So you can see that now these numbers are being mapped onto words and generated words. And from there we got really ambitious. Is that the script is measuring whether it's a positive or a negative number, and depending whether it's positive or negative, it's choosing from a range of texts and then stitching them all together using Markov chains or n-grams to produce sentences. These sentences look like what they call anakolugon, which is sentences that kind of shift grammatical structures in the middle. Sometimes they make sense, sometimes they don't. These sentences have been posted to Twitter. So right now we have 3 Twitter accounts, one for each fate. So Clotho is tweeting right now, but she only tweets once every 90 seconds or so. This is because Twitter doesn't like it if you tweet too often, and it will shut you down. So sadly, that's all we get. When we move on to Stacy, we'll have Lachesis, the measurer, and Kristen is Atropos. So I'm just going to leave Clotho kind of telling stories in the background while I talk a little bit about me as Clotho. All right, so for completely coincidental purposes, today is Parilia, April 21st, festival of the Roman god goddess Pales, patron of shepherds and flocks. And I think Jim played that on this. So I'm going to start with an invocation to the protector of our familial animals, our animal familiars, without whom there would be no fleece, no thread, no cloth to cut. So this is from Ovid's The Fasti, and it starts, "The night has gone, dawn breaks, I'm called upon to sing of the Perilia, and not in vain, if kindly Pales aids me. Kindly Pales, if I respect your festival, then aid me as I sing of pastoral rites. Shepherd, purify your sated sheep at twilight. First sprinkle the ground with water and sweep it, and decorate the sheepfold with leaves and branches, and hide the festive door with a trailing garland. May I drive back as many sheep as dawn revealed, nor sigh returning with fleeces snatched from the wolves. Avert dire famine, let leaves and grass be abundant, and water to wash the body, water to drink. May I press full udders, may my cheeses bring me money. May the wicker sieve strain my liquid way, and let the ram be lusty, his mate conceive and bear, and may there be many a lamb in my fold. And let the wool prove soft, not scratch the girls. Let it everywhere be kind to gentle hands. Let my prayer be granted, and every year will make huge cakes for Pales' mistress, the shepherds." Okay. So let's talk about Clotho. Spin. Spin is the way the world turns. Our iron core churns. Our planetary mass produces the steady 1G that my accelerometer measures at rest. All things vibrate with a vital or inert matter. Quantum particles, our bosons, gluons, photons, spin like tiny gyroscopes. Constant speed, variable direction. Feel the whirl of the whirl of the world in your bones. Today I perform Clotho, who spins the thread of life. Clotho, resolutely analog, the only digits, my fingers, the only mathematics in the steady beat, my foot. And yet spin is intrinsic to the language of quantum computing. Perhaps digital thinking is at work. What goes around comes around. Clotho's thread is made of animal, vegetable, or artificial fibers. These fibers take angular momentum from a wheel or spindle and convert it into twist. These are stronger together than apart. Take two threads and spin them in reverse, and they ply together in a twisty embrace. Variable speed, variable direction. Today I'm working with fiber from blue-faced Leicesters of unknown provenance, known for having a long staple length or fiber length, making hand spinning easier. These sheep are unnamed, but I have fiber here from 3 North Carolina animals, 2 alpacas, Juliet, daughter of Jolinda, Mrs. Eli, and this is Angora fiber from Hazelnut, who is a tricolor Angora rabbit. So 2 alpacas and a rabbit. This is unnamed sheep. This is silk. These are silk eggs. We're in eggs. Okay. And this is what comes out the other end once you spin it and ply it. Okay. These are my familial animals, my animal familiars. Without Pales, goddess of the flock, no Clotho. We take alpacas and turn them into string. The alpaca remains. Spinning, like any technological assemblage, has its own vocabulary. Short staple wool, long staple worsted, spindle and distaff. The gendering of spinning, like most textile production, leaves intriguing remnants in this dictionary. The bobbin and flyer section is traditionally called the mother of all. Supported by 2 rods called the maidens. In pre-industrial European textile producing households, preparatory fiber work, such as carding and spinning, was considered women's work, with the more technical activity of finishing and weaving passed on to men. The spinning jenny, invented in Lancashire in 1764, moved domestic textile production into the factory, with a concomitant shift in the fiber-prepped labour force from female to male. In the factories of Lancashire, men operated large-scale spinners called mules, the length of this room, lubricated by mineral oils. As the spinners worked, they pushed their groins up against the carcinogenic oils, leading to a condition called mule spinner's cancer and epithelioma of the scrotum. Today, gendered spin has shifted further inside to the most intimate parts of the body. A sex selection technique known as the Erickson method, but colloquially known as sperm spinning, uses a centrifuge to separate male-coded from female-coded sperm. Spin, in short, is embedded in the world, elementally, socially, materially, technically. In working with my accelerometer, I see movement in two axes, x and y. Z may have a slight wobble, but it's mostly stable. So, like this. Mapping the numbers, I see them move in flux, as in this diagram. And finally. This is measuring just gravity, straight up gravity. X increasing here, causing a positive reading, decreasing here and here, causing a negative. Y similarly shifts values from quarter to quarter. Mapping these shifts, I see to my surprise my old frenemy from graduate school, the Greimas square, or semiotic square, what Donna Haraway once characterized as the clackety structuralist meaning-making machine that she used for formulating her four-square cyborg in The Promises of Monsters. In Haraway's footsteps, thinking of Paley's and Clotho, animal and human, I remap. First, Paley's, who watches over the animals, the non-human creators of my fiber. Next, Paley's and Clotho, collaborators, human and non-human in the act of spinning. Third, the animal co-author fades away, making way for human Lachesis. She measures, leaning into the digital technology of moon and shuttle, up and down, 1 and 0. Finally, Atropos, neither animal nor human, maker of the machine-generated objects that appear from captured data. The circle is squared. We make string out of alpacas, take its measure, and turn it into shapes that look like clocks or sundials. We write mechanical poems from the movements of our hands. We post them to Twitter, clickety-clackety. And for reference, the text corpus that Clotho is using is Language and Fashion by Roland Barthes, Tender Buttons, which it loves, Ovid's The Fasti, an old thing called Fusus from a dictionary of Greek and Roman antiquities, 1890, the Schofield Carding Machines, 1957, by Grace Rogers from the US National Museum Bulletin, Human Machine Reconsidered by Lucy Sushman, and this talk, because writing is recombination, or as our animal collaborators might remind us, it's turtles all the way down. Thank you.
I embody Lachesis, the one who measures. When she weaves, Lachesis takes what has been made, a spun thread, and further manipulates it before it will be inevitably cut and dismantled. She assigns each thread a length, but she also assigns it a time and a place among others, a relation to herself, to other threads, and a relation to technology, the loom that coordinates the process that will embed, adjoin, and thread it along with others. In this way, threads never really live in isolation once they touch the hands of a weaver, even if they all come from the same stuff, or not, as you've seen up here. But the journey of the thread is often hidden to us once we've seen it become fabric, as is the role and the process of the one who engineers its location and its intermeshing. determining the beginnings and endings of a single thread and fashioning it carefully and tediously into something less like bits and pieces and more like a tapestry is lost to many of us who often cannot see the trees for the forest, so to speak. And so the radical interconnectivity enabled by the weaver takes on a materiality and a density that in some ways overrides the process of the weaving itself. So let me talk a little bit more about digital ephemera from the space in the middle that the weaver holds, the one who measures, working not as the originator of the stuff, nor as the one with the responsibility for ending things, like Atropos will, but as the unruly and often overridden middle child who stands in the center with the easily forgotten processes that transform in a continual, slow, ongoing pattern. To see that, we have to listen, and to quote from a Joy Harjo poem, quote, "Know that there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know except in moments steadily growing and in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion." Let me suggest a few things at this middle ground, focused on articulating some of what is ephemeral about the actions that both rely upon and create the relationality that characterizes the digital, in this sense at least. So first, then, let me talk about the relationality of making in the middle, first by talking about the connections that processes of the digital make and establish among bodies, tools, and surroundings. And so Lachesis herself is not always represented in language visually. We don't always know exactly what she looks like or what her body looks like. But to the weaver, the position of the body matters a lot. The size of the body, the relationship of the body to the tool, the orientations and the knowledge held in the body matter. The realm of the digital in this way is not separate from our bodies, and you see this if you try to weave. And I've learned some of this from queer Chicana poet and theorist Gloria Anzaldúa, so I'll tell you two of my texts that are getting pulled from so far are a selection of Joy Harjo poems and a piece by Gloria Anzaldúa, Now Let Us Shift. But Anzaldúa discusses at once a kind of knowledge enforced on bodies as a habitual and unconscious set of movements and thoughts that should be decolonized, as well as a, quote, intuitive sense like the intellect of heart and gut that reveals a discourse of signs, images, feelings, and words that once decoded carry out the power to startle you out of tunnel vision and habitual patterns of thought. With digital making in this middle space of process, these kinds of things sort of come into play with each other in interesting ways. So I can tell you that I have a loom at home that I use, and I haven't used it as much lately as I wish I had, but it's a jack floor loom that's set up very differently from the loom here I'm borrowing from Helen, which is a rigid heddle loom. So if you watch me down there, I'm struggling a little bit with this thing because the very motion of how you need to move your body in relationship to this tool is radically different from the one I use at home. And so when I use the loom at home, I move the heddle up and down using my feet and pedals on the floor. Here I move it manually, and it serves the same purpose to beat back the thread that it also serves to create a shed to move the shuttle through. And so while the binary movement is similar across the two looms, the embodied movement of working through the technology is radically different. And so I think thinking through that relationality is something that weaving can help us sort of get a handle on. Point 2. Yeah. The second sort of idea I wanted to talk through then in relationship to thinking about the relationality that weaving helps us think through with the digital is related to the work of the loom itself. So frequently positioned as a forerunner of computing, the shuttles and the heddles produce patterns that depend on binary logic. So you see the sheds create an up and down movement, and if you're doing things right, create a situation in which you make patterns with your threads based on an up or down, off or on kind of movement. And so it's interesting to think about what the technology of the loom accomplishes with respect to a thread. And the stories we tell ourselves about technologies and what they accomplish often emphasize things like the addition that they bring to human power, the economy that they produce of human time, the conversions of substances that are common into substances that have worth that we can use in other ways. Technologies suggest increasing control over environment and increasing ways to mechanize processes and ideas in ways that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And so two of my other texts that are pulling from behind me are Vannevar Bush's work and also Charles Babbage's, thinking about the kind of general use of technologies and what they create for us. It's interesting to think about the loom in this way, though, and what it accomplishes today with respect to creating cloth or not. Again, many of us aren't as familiar with the loom as we are with the cloth itself. And so when I got the loom that I use at my home, I got it off eBay, like you might guess, from someone who had sort of discarded it in the back of their garage after getting it as a craft project and then not using it anymore. So it also kind of asks us to think about what role the loom actually plays today, and what it accomplishes for us or does not accomplish for us. And we know much about fabric, but maybe not so much about the process. And so this takes me to my last point. I want to talk a little bit about the relationality of digital making by talking about the thing made, the textile. So you'll see this when you come up to look in a moment. The thing made in the middle. What I want to focus on here is how the interconnection of components made into material has a tendency to constantly overwrite our ability to see and remember the processes that led to its production. So the last set of texts that I chose to have pull Lachesis' voice from are Ada Lovelace's correspondence, in which she's learning the math that eventually helped her to create a kind of computing machine. And so these are lovely texts because they show the kind of process of coming to know this knowledge that eventually creates a kind of binary machine. But the collaborative discussion is striking there, and this kind of ephemera is often lost in the traces. When I weave, and when you see something like this on a loom, there's a lot of hidden labor that happens before you would ever get to the spot of working the web through the warp. And so if you want to know about the process, it starts early on thinking about how many threads you'll have, how they'll be looped through, what the patterns will be set up on the loom that will enable you to create something later. You'll have to think about the space between threads, how large your yarn is that you're going to use. And these kinds of aspects of process are often very difficult for us to capture and see. And so I chose Lovelace's words as well as text from the newsletter of the Medieval Textile Study Group to include for Lachesis' voice, because they give some voice to this kind of aspect of process that's very difficult to trace, but that's so central to all of us that learn to use the technology in this way. The Medieval Textile Study Group texts are very interesting because they give drafts and patterns about how to set up and recover not only the products of medieval textiles, but also the processes of how they're made. So those two things became a way of trying to capture this part of what's ephemeral that often gets maybe seen in the textile itself, but lost in the process. So what I wanted to focus on is the way that digital processes involve conscious and unconscious grafting together of multiple actors always, and the way that this middle ground of work of putting things together and measuring it out is often very difficult for us to capture when we're thinking about the process. And now I'll turn it over to Atropos, who will cut us off.
I'm going to go ahead and say while we're waiting for Atropos to begin speaking, I just want us all to sit in silence and listen to that 3D printer speak to us and sing its song. So I embody Atropos, the fate of death. So I'm going to be talking about death today. This is how we're going to end our day. Happy Friday, everyone. I cut the thread of life and I fix it over there We haven't named Helen's 3D printer yet, but I think we're going to name it Atropos. It's agendered, and as is often the depictions of Atropos herself. And so, meet Atropos. As we kind of begin this invocation, alongside this song that Atropos sings to us, I want to read a little bit from one of the texts that this program is calling from. This is in part a chapbook that I had written as my MFA in poetry thesis manuscript. And these poems were the first time that I was facing myself in my own work. The you, whenever I speak this poem, when you hear it, the you is me. And it's the first time where I call myself by name in a poem. And it also happens to be about death and about the traces and the waste that gets left behind in the wake of death. And so I really, as I speak, I know I'm kind of speaking over Atropos right now. Sorry, girl. But I want you to kind of take in the ambience of this room. Focus on the way that your body is sitting in its chair, the noise that's coming through here, the rate of change of these texts over here, the people that are behind you, beside you, the non-humans that are also behind you and beside you and around you. And you can close your eyes if you want, but I'm not gonna make you do that, because here it is, it's Friday, we're talking about death. When you look at a photograph of a person, and you know in your knowing place that the person is dead, and she is going to die, you are compelled to spit out your dead body, a mirror, the tool by which Plotnick et al. Proved that pachyderma were aware of an internal self. Your moon face, you are dead in the glass, and you touch the spot where it will occur. Your face in the glass. The process of preservation doesn't always take. Your skin hanging down to reveal a body, all tusk. So again, if you listen carefully, in that moment the printer was singing to you alongside me. It made a human sound. It called to you to watch it. It also, perhaps unbeknownst to you, was filling the air with PLA filament particles as it's melting down into layers, this little kitty cat figurine. And I'm so glad that this morning, Jeffrey, you spoke a little bit about the kind of environmental waste that happens with this process, because that's what I kind of want to talk about today. For Atropos, she cuts the thread of life, thereby erasing the process of becoming and coming into being that Stacy just spoke of with Lachesis. But what I want to talk about today is what is left behind, the ambient, environmental, bodily traces of death that complicate the notion of life as ephemeral, of the digital as ephemeral. The poem I just read is one of the texts that we use to automate Atropos' Twitter presence. Again, a book of poems from my MFA manuscript. And that book is about the ways that the things of our lives follow us. They're there on the periphery, defining us though we may not see it, bringing us into being and even cutting our life short at times. They're in the way our bodies decompose. I want to complicate this notion of the digital as ephemeral by saying that our technologies are embodied and made visible by their traces. And while the spinning wheel or the loom may seem to us more present than the digital, more weighty, that the digital also has a body, but perhaps a different kind, one that is more permanent, in fact, in its ability to construct itself as immanence. My argument is that the digital is not ephemeral, that the act of cutting, of printing here, is one of death that creates a waste product, that creates trash, that creates traces that have a forever kind of presence. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my process for creating these models that you see up here. They are my sundials for Atropos. She's often set alongside that emblem, the kind of turning of time. So my process in kind of configuring this is that I'm taking data from the spinning wheel that was used to spin this, as well as I think in future iterations I'm going to be taking a separate set of data. I attempted to create a point cloud, and I was really actually upset by this because I wanted it to be a weird shape. I've tried to do some work like this before, and I've gotten the error, cannot make manifold, which I think is a beautiful, beautiful error. What ended up happening was that it was a line, and I was very sad because I hate lines. Lines are awful. But in kind of speaking in conversation with Helen and Stacy, I realized that the line was what we were talking about. Here you see the lines that Stacy is working with. These lines that end up becoming the yarn that become the clothes we wear. So the line ended up being actually a really, really useful tool. Of course, this is a point cloud, so I'm working in a 3D modeling software, which was also awful. Thank you, Sotin, for talking about that this morning. But I had this moment where the person I was working with in the library took out a protractor and actually measured the angle of the line. So though we were working in this kind of point cloud, very nebulous, non-material way, here he is, he brings out his little zipper pocket with his mathematical tools and measures the angle. And so that's what you see here. These two little sundials, I don't know if you guys can see it, you'll be able to whenever you come up. These are two, the white is a test print and the green is actually the data from this green thread. It is a 3D printed representation of Helen spinning yarn. And so there are these kind of layers that are happening between the digital and the physical. So one thing that really, really occurred to me as I was printing these prints, the process is always difficult, as we've talked about. There's always kinds of frustrations. But I'm sitting in the graduate student lab where our MakerBot is. We do not have a ventilation system. And it occurred to me that the place where I usually print things is in the makerspace, which has very, very like complicated ventilation system, and they're very, very serious about saying put the vent thing over the printer so that you don't, get cancer later. And here I am in the grad student lab, of course, and that doesn't exist. So I became very aware of my body. I became very aware of my lungs all of a sudden. I became very aware of the ways that this printing process was cutting data. It was fixing it, it was stabilizing it. But it was also coming into me. It was in my body and it was fixing itself. So that's a little bit of my process. As I was choosing texts, I was really thinking about this idea of death and its byproducts, of cutting and its byproducts. I ended up choosing several texts, Derrida's Hauntology, 2 pieces by Jonathan Stern about the waste of technology, Kittler's There's No Software, again a set of the poems, one of which I read to you, some text garbled together about Atropos herself, and then Joyelle McSweeney's essay on the necropastoral, which is a recent movement in poetry that aims to highlight the Anthropocene's role in art and writing, how death as a character or as a landscape gets woven through the site of poetic making. So in thinking about what these texts mean for the project, I came to 2 ideas that I'd like to explore: the role of death in this story and the waste that it leaves behind. Stern writes that technology's work is to split a subject from its body, to erase the body. And yet tech clearly has physical infrastructure, which we've talked excellently about today. It has weight and presence in its constant turnover, in its dying and being reborn. The cloud sits somewhere in a data center, gathering dust. The erased files on our hard drive leave minute scratches that can be drug up for forensic purposes. When we think of Moore's Law, we know that technology necessitates its own death, but we also consider how technology necessitates its own waste. The image from McSweeney's essay on the necropastoral is a seabird of some kind, dead in the sand, its body decomposed to reveal none else but the massive amount of trash that it has eaten over its lifetime. The necropastoral is about waste, about the ways that technology lingers in us, even inside us. I think of this as we sit here, breathing in the plastic fumes from this 3D printer, not actually knowing its effect on our bodies, and not really rushing to find out either. As I spoke earlier with Jeffrey, not many people are interested in learning about the carcinogenic effects of PLA filament. So how are our bodies being visited by the ghost of this technology? How are we ourselves being fixed by its supposed ephemerality? Derrida's hauntology becomes the next text that helps me theorize the ways that the digital is not ephemeral but lasting and persisting. Digital technology, everything from this printer to the Internet of Things to sensor implants, has a physical denseness. It is here, it has weight, it has presence, but by constructing it as a commodity, as digital, it becomes ephemeral, magical. It has weight, but it is fleeting too. Derrida says that we can touch it, but we can't. We can sense it, but there's nothing there to sense, like a ghost limb. While I see this notion of the commodity specter at play here, I also see the hauntology as something that is in fact material. We know the particles are inside us because I just told you, but we can't touch or see them. We can't sense them. And perhaps even when we talk about something like data, like the data coming in off the sensors here, there's actually a little sensor attached to the nozzle of the printer. Something that has no presence, we do sense it, we hear it, and we know that it's there. We have a kind of proprioception. We have a notion of something material, something weighty coming into being as we speak. So Atropos, the fate of death, cuts the thread of life while she's here with us, cutting the filament, fixing it in space. Originally I was going to print another sundial, but there was a mishap, so now it's a cute little kitty cat. As a product after process, we recognize her work as something that ends and erases life, and it ushers souls on in a kind of tracing. There are a few threads hanging from her scissors, another afterlife beginning in the kingdom of the dead. I call for us to consider our technology, all of the technologies we've seen today, in this light as trash specters, as bodiless bodies that live inside us as we decompose, as things that have permanence in death. Thank you.